Before we begin, this content is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before starting any new health regimen, especially if you're pregnant, nursing, or taking medication. Most gardeners look at a shaded patch of ground and see a problem. They see wasted space, wasted potential. A corner of the yard that just won't grow anything. But for thousands of years, the most skilled healers, foragers, and food growers on Earth looked at that same patch of shade and saw a pharmacy, a pantry, a lifeline. The plants we're covering today didn't just survive in the shade, they evolved for it. They spent millions of years developing complex chemistry, extraordinary resilience, and nutrients so dense that indigenous cultures built entire healing traditions around them. And then, somewhere in the last century or so, we forgot almost all of it. Number 9 on this list was a staple food for mountain communities across 3 continents. Number 14 was so powerful that ancient civilizations literally went to war over who controlled its trade routes. And number 17 grows so aggressively in shade that the only real challenge is keeping it contained. These aren't exotic greenhouse specimens you'll never find. Most of them can be grown in a container on a shaded porch, tucked under a tree in a yard, or cultivated in a north-facing garden bed that gets 0 direct sun. Whether you have 5 acres or 5 square feet, this list was made for you. Let's start with a plant so common in shaded woodlands that most people walk past it every single day without knowing they're stepping around one of the oldest medicines on the continent. Wild ginger. Not the tropical ginger you buy at the grocery store. This is Asarum canadense, a low-growing ground cover native to the forest floors of eastern North America that's been used medicinally for centuries by Cherokee, Iroquois, and Ojibwe healers. It spreads slowly in dense, heart-shaped mats of deep green leaves, thrives in full to part shade, and laughs at dry, root-filled soil that would kill most other plants. Traditional herbalists used it to support digestion, ease nausea, and address respiratory complaints. The roots have a warm, spicy aroma similar to culinary ginger, and while wild ginger contains compounds called aristolochic acids that make it unsuitable for internal use in large quantities, it has a rich history as a ceremonial and aromatic plant, and as a ground cover, it's practically bomb-proof. Plant it once, and it will slowly colonize the hard, shaded areas of your garden where nothing else will grow. Speaking of plants that colonize shade like they own it, Solomon's seal is one of the most graceful, useful, and criminally overlooked plants in the entire herbal world. Polygonatum biflorum grows in arching bamboo-like stems that emerge each spring from a slowly expanding rhizome, and it will thrive in the deepest, driest shade you have, under maples, along north-facing foundations, in the shadow of a fence line. For centuries, Appalachian herbalists used Solomon's seal root to support joint health, connective tissue repair, and recovery from repetitive strain injuries. The plant contains steroidal saponins and other compounds that researchers are now studying for their potential effects on tissue lubrication and flexibility. Traditional healers described it as a plant that helps the body remember its proper alignment. And while that's poetic language, there's growing scientific interest in the mechanisms behind those traditional uses. The young shoots are also edible in spring, prepared similarly to asparagus. This is a plant that earns its place a dozen times over. Right beside it in the woodland garden, you'll often find bloodroot, Sanguinaria canadensis, one of the most visually striking early spring ephemerals in North America. It emerges in April with its large, lobed leaf wrapped protectively around a single white flower, blooms for just a few days, and then disappears back into the earth by summer. You'd almost miss it if you weren't looking. But Native American healers and later colonial settlers didn't miss it. The vivid orange-red sap from its roots was used ceremonially for body paint and as a dye, and the plant has a long history of use in traditional medicine for respiratory support and skin conditions. Modern research has identified a compound called sanguinarine in the roots, which has been studied extensively for its antimicrobial properties and appears in some natural oral care products. Bloodroot requires patience. It spreads slowly and resents disturbance. But once established in moist, shaded soil, it returns faithfully every spring, like a reminder that some beautiful things only reveal themselves to those who pay attention. Let's talk about a plant that bridged the food and medicine worlds for almost every culture that encountered it. Ramps, Allium tricoccum, are wild leeks that grow in dense colonies on the forest floor across eastern North America. And for indigenous communities and Appalachian settlers alike, they were the first fresh food of spring. Coming out of a long winter with limited vitamin intake, ramps were a genuine survival food. Intensely flavored, nutrient-dense, and one of the first green things to emerge when the ground thawed. They're rich in vitamins A and C, contain quercetin and other flavonoids associated with immune and cardiovascular support, and have been studied for their potential antimicrobial properties. Today, ramps have been rediscovered by the farm-to-table restaurant world and sell for shocking prices at urban farmers markets. But you can grow your own in any shaded, moist woodland patch or under a deciduous tree. They take a few years to establish from seed, but once they're going, they spread reliably and give you a harvest every spring that connects you directly to centuries of Appalachian foodways. Closing out this first group, wild garlic mustard. I know, the name doesn't inspire much romance. Alliaria petiolata is technically considered invasive across much of North America, which means it's free, abundant, and absolutely everywhere in shaded, disturbed areas, along woodland edges and under hedgerows. Medieval European peasants used it as a pot herb, a salad green, and a condiment. It has a mild garlic mustard flavor that's genuinely good. It's rich in vitamins A, C, and E, and harvesting it aggressively is actually considered ecologically responsible in areas where it's invasive. There's something fitting about a forgotten food that thrives precisely where it's most unwanted. Before we go further, take a quick look around your property, or even think about a shaded corner of a balcony or patio, because everything we're covering today can be grown in spaces most people have completely given up on. If you have a north-facing fence, a shaded courtyard, a yard dominated by mature trees, you don't have a gardening problem. You have a specific set of conditions that these plants were literally designed for. Shade isn't a limitation. It's a niche waiting to be filled. Now we start getting into territory where most modern gardeners have never even heard these names. And that's exactly where the real treasure is buried. Sweet Cicely, Myrrhis odorata, is an herb that was once a fixture in every monastery garden across medieval Europe and has almost completely vanished from modern cultivation. It's a lacy, fern-like perennial that grows happily in partial to full shade, smells faintly of anise, and produces every part edible: leaves, seeds, and roots. Medieval herbalists used it as a digestive tonic and to support respiratory health. Its seeds were chewed as a breath freshener. The roots were eaten as a vegetable. What makes Sweet Cicely particularly interesting from a modern perspective is that the leaves contain natural compounds that have a mildly sweet taste. They were historically added to fruit dishes to reduce the amount of sugar needed, which is why some herbalists call it the sugar saver. Studies suggest it may support digestive comfort and contains anethol, a compound also found in anise and fennel with studied anti-inflammatory properties. It's easy to grow from fresh seed in cool, shady spots and will self-seed gently once established. This is a plant that monastic healers considered essential, and most people today have never heard of it. From medieval monastery gardens to the forest floors of East Asia, Siberian, Boglos, Brunera macrophylla, might be the most underrated shade perennial in the gardening world. It produces clouds of tiny blue, forget-me-not flowers in spring, above large, heart-shaped leaves that persist through summer. In traditional Slavic herbal medicine, related Brunera species were used as expectorants to support respiratory health. The plant contains allantoin, a compound also found in comfrey, widely studied, for its ability to support skin cell regeneration and tissue repair. As a garden plant, it's essentially indestructible in shade. It tolerates drought, clay soil, root competition, and deep shade that would kill almost anything else. And it's beautiful, genuinely, stop in your tracks, beautiful in spring. That combination of ornamental value, traditional medicinal history, and near-zero maintenance. Requirements should make it a standard in every shade garden. Let's cross to Japan for a moment. Spikenard, and specifically American spikenard, Aurelia racemosa, is a giant, dramatic shade perennial that was one of the most important medicinal plants in both Eastern North American indigenous tradition and traditional Chinese medicine, where a related species has been used for over 2,000 years. The plant produces enormous compound leaves on burgundy stems and reaches 5 to 6 feet tall in deep shade, making it one of the few truly large plants on this list. Cherokee healers used the berries and roots to support respiratory function, addressing conditions that sound like what we today call bronchitis or deep chest colds. The roots contain compounds called diterpene acids and saponins that researchers are now investigating for anti-inflammatory and immune-modulating properties. The young shoots are edible in spring, and the berries, while small and seedy, were used historically to make wine. This is a plant that was once so valued, it was traded across native trade networks spanning hundreds of miles, and today most people would walk past it in a forest without a second glance. Golden seal. If you've spent any time in the natural health world, you may have heard this name, but most people don't know it's actually a shade plant native to the forest floors of eastern North America, and that it's now endangered in the wild precisely because of how aggressively it was over-harvested. Hydrastis canadensis grows only about a foot tall, produces a single white flower, and demands rich, consistently moist woodland soil in partial to full shade. It is not an easy plant to grow, but it is one worth understanding. Traditional Cherokee and Iroquois healers used it as an antimicrobial wash, a digestive tonic, and to support immune function during illness. The alkaloid berberine, which golden seal contains in significant concentration, is one of the most studied plant compounds in modern pharmacology. Research confirms berberine's potential to support healthy blood sugar levels, cardiovascular function, and gut microbiome balance. Growing golden seal at home serves a dual purpose. It gives you access to a genuinely valuable medicinal plant, and it reduces pressure on wild populations that are struggling. From seed to harvestable root takes 4 to 5 years, so patience is required. But few plants reward that patience more generously. Here's something worth pausing on. A lot of this knowledge wasn't lost by accident. It was replaced, pushed aside, and in some cases actively discouraged when industrialized food systems and pharmaceutical culture took over in the 20th century. The plants we're talking about today didn't disappear because they stopped working. They disappeared because there was no profit model built around them. You can't patent wild ginger. You can't trademark a ramp patch. And that's exactly why reclaiming this knowledge feels like something quietly radical. An act of independence that costs almost nothing and returns something that money genuinely can't buy. Keep watching, because we still have more than half this list to go, and some of the most surprising plants are coming up. Lungwort, Pulmonaria officinalis, got its name from an old European doctrine that held plants with spotted leaves resembled diseased lung tissue, and were therefore indicated for lung conditions. That sounds superstitious, but there's a thread of genuine utility here. Medieval European herbalists used Pulmonaria extensively for coughs, bronchitis, and respiratory congestion. Modern analysis has found the plant contains allantoin, rosmarinic acid, and tannins that may help support respiratory mucous membrane health. As a garden plant, it's exceptional. It thrives in deep shade, produces stunning flowers that open pink and mature to blue, and its silver-spotted leaves provide visual interest all season. It's one of the earliest blooms of the spring garden, feeding bees when almost nothing else is flowering. Tough, beautiful, historically medicinal, and practically ignored by modern gardeners. That's a recurring theme in this list. Let's talk about yellow archangel, Lamiastrum galeobdolon, another plant that has essentially been forgotten as a medicinal herb while becoming mildly infamous as an aggressive ground cover. It covers shaded ground under trees faster than almost anything else you can plant. It's drought-tolerant once established, and it produces bright yellow flowers in late spring that look genuinely cheerful in the gloom under a dense canopy. Traditional European herbalists used it to support wound healing, reduce inflammation, and address skin conditions. It contains iridoids and flavonoids associated with anti-inflammatory activity in preliminary research. As ground cover, it's admittedly very vigorous, in some climates genuinely aggressive, so plant it where you want permanent coverage and don't mind it spreading. For a shaded slope, a north-facing hillside, or a dark area under mature conifers, there are few plants more effective. This is where things get interesting. Number 14. I promised you this one at the start. Asafoetida. Ferula asafoetida. If you've ever cooked Indian or Persian food, you may have encountered this as a pungent spice, but its history runs so much deeper than the spice rack. For over 2,000 years, asafoetida was one of the most valuable trade commodities in the ancient world. It was used as a substitute for silphium, a plant so prized in ancient Rome that it was harvested to extinction. Traders carried it across the Silk Road. Persian physicians called it the food of the gods. Ancient Greek and Roman texts mention it as a treatment for digestive complaints, respiratory conditions, and nervous system disorders. The plant itself, a giant ferula that grows in the partial shade of mountain foothills across Central Asia, produces a gum resin from its roots that contains compounds called furanocoumarins and various sulfur compounds. Modern research has confirmed potential antispasmodic, anti-inflammatory, and antimicrobial properties. It was used traditionally to support digestion, reduce bloating, ease respiratory spasms, and even address hysteria and nervous exhaustion. A note of caution. Asafoetida is not recommended during pregnancy. You can grow it in a sheltered spot with some shade protection, and the resin is widely available as a dried spice in any South Asian grocery store. But the story of this plant, its role in collapsing trade empires, its connection to an extinct relative, its journey from the mountain slopes of Afghanistan to every Indian kitchen, is one of the most remarkable in the entire plant world. Ancient civilizations didn't go to war over exaggeration. They went to war over this. Coming back to the forest floor. Hepatica nobilis, is a tiny woodland wildflower that blooms almost before the snow is fully gone, pushing delicate lavender, pink, or white flowers up through leaf litter in late winter or early spring. It's one of those plants that, once you've seen it in the wild, you never forget. For centuries, herbalists across Europe and North America used hepatica to support liver and gallbladder function. The lobed leaves were thought to resemble the liver, and the name reflects that association. While the liver doctrine connection is more metaphor than mechanism, the plant does contain compounds including protoanemone and various tannins with studied antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. As a garden plant in shade, it's exquisite and completely maintenance-free once established. It's also an important early nectar source for pollinators. Let's move to something you can eat every week. Malabar spinach, Bacella alba, is a vigorous climbing vine from tropical Asia that has been cultivated as a leafy green across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean for centuries. Here's why it belongs on this list. Unlike true spinach, which bolts in heat and needs full sun, Malabar spinach grows enthusiastically in partial shade and actually prefers the heat of summer. In a shaded tropical or subtropical garden, it becomes a reliable leafy green factory. Nutritionally, it punches well above its weight, rich in vitamins A, C, and B9, iron, calcium, and potent antioxidants. Traditional Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine used it to support digestive health, cooling inflammation, and skin vitality. The leaves are mucilaginous, slightly thick and slippery when cooked, which makes them excellent in soups and stir-fries, where that texture works beautifully. If you live in USDA zones 7 and above, this plant will grow vigorously, in filtered shade against a fence or trellis with almost no care at all. Turkish rocket, Bunias orientalis, is a vegetable so old that it appears in records from ancient Anatolia, and so obscure that most Western gardeners have genuinely never heard of it. It produces large rosettes of deeply lobed leaves that taste like a mild, nutty arugula in spring, then sends up flowering stalks whose buds can be eaten like broccoli. It tolerates partial shade, poor soil, drought, and cold. It's essentially a perennial vegetable that requires planting once and harvests for decades. Traditional Turkish and Caucasian farmers grew it as a pot herb and early spring green when winter stores were running low. It's high in vitamin C, glucosinolates, and other compounds associated with general health support. It has almost zero presence in modern Western cultivation, which is a genuine loss, because as perennial, low-maintenance, shade-tolerant vegetables go, it's extraordinary. Ostrich fern, Mateuccia struthiopteris, is technically not an herb in the medicinal sense, but it absolutely belongs on this list because it may be the most productive edible shade plant you can grow in a temperate climate. The tightly coiled fiddleheads that emerge in early spring are a genuine regional delicacy. In the northeastern United States and Canada, where foragers collect them in late April and May before they unfurl. Indigenous communities across northeastern North America ate fiddleheads as a spring tonic food after long winters. A burst of nutrients, including omega-3 fatty acids, iron, and vitamins A and C, arriving exactly when fresh food was most needed. Important note: fiddleheads must be cooked. Do not eat them raw, as they contain compounds that can cause digestive distress when uncooked. Steam or boil them for at least 10 minutes. But cooked, they taste like a cross between asparagus and spinach, and a single established clump of ostrich fern can produce dozens of edible fiddleheads each spring. In deep shade, poor soil, and wet conditions that would challenge almost any other food plant. Here's a plant that has been quietly used in traditional medicine on 4 separate continents without any of those cultures having contact with each other, which is about as strong an endorsement as a plant can get. Black cohosh, Octea racemosa, is native to the shaded woodland understory of eastern North America, produces dramatic wands of white flowers up to 6 feet tall in midsummer, and has been one of the most important women's health plants in both Native American tradition and 19th century eclectic American medicine. Cherokee and Iroquois healers used it to support reproductive health, ease discomfort during menstrual cycles, and assist with childbirth. European settlers adopted it so enthusiastically that it became a major commercial botanical export. Modern research has produced dozens of clinical studies on its potential role in supporting menopausal symptom management, particularly hot flashes and sleep disruption, with some trials showing meaningful effects. Important caution: black cohosh is not recommended during pregnancy without medical supervision. It can also interact with certain medications, but for a shaded native plant garden, it's stunning, important, and connected to one of the most continuous traditions of plant-based women's health support on this continent. We're approaching the end of this list, and the last 2 plants are ones I want to give real attention to, because they've arguably done more for human health across more cultures than almost anything else that grows in shade. Wood betony, Stachys betonica, also called Betonica officinalis, was the single most important medicinal herb in Anglo-Saxon England. Medieval manuscripts list over 40 different conditions it was used to address. Monks grew it in every physic garden. There was an Italian proverb that said, "Sell your coat and buy betony." It was, in the pre-modern European medical world, the plant equivalent of a universal first aid kit. It grows willingly in partial shade in well-drained soil, produces purple flower spikes in midsummer, and attracts pollinators vigorously. Traditional uses included supporting nervous system health, easing headaches and anxiety, supporting digestion, and addressing what herbalists called weakness of the stomach. Modern herbalists still use it, and preliminary research has identified iridoids, tannins, and alkaloids that may support its traditional applications for nervous system and digestive function. It's easy to grow, beautiful, and carries about as much accumulated human knowledge behind it as any plant alive. And finally, saved for last, because it genuinely deserves the anchor position: sweet woodruff, Galium odoratum. This low-growing, spreading ground cover blankets the forest floor across Europe in a carpet of star-shaped whorled leaves and delicate white flowers, and it has been woven into European herbal tradition since at least the 9th century. Medieval Germans hung bundles of it in churches to sweeten the air. It was used to stuff mattresses. It flavored wine. And healers used it as a gentle tonic for liver support, as a mild sedative, and to address venous insufficiency, the sensation of heavy, aching legs from poor circulation. It contains coumarins, the same class of compounds found in many beloved aromatic plants, which give it its characteristic sweet, fresh scent. Research suggests coumarins may support healthy venous tone and circulation. Sweet woodruff grows in deep, dry shade under large trees where virtually nothing else will grow, spreads steadily to form a beautiful ground cover, and requires almost no maintenance once established. In medieval Europe, it was considered a gift. A plant that asked for nothing and gave generously in return. That's 20 plants. 20 forgotten things that grow in the darkest corners of your garden, your yard, your land, or in containers on a shaded balcony. Each one carrying centuries of human wisdom in its roots and leaves and chemistry. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. We tend to think of knowledge as something that accumulates, that we always know more than the people who came before us. And in some areas that's true. But in others, particularly in our relationship with plants, with food, with the living systems we evolved alongside, we have lost genuinely irreplaceable things. Not because they stopped working, not because they were superseded by something better, but because of speed and convenience and the economics of a world that values what can be packaged and sold. Reclaiming these plants doesn't mean rejecting modern medicine. It doesn't mean going backward. It means going deeper, adding layers to your understanding of health, food, and the land you live on. It means that a shaded corner of your garden stops being wasted space and starts being a living connection to 10,000 years of human knowledge about how to survive and heal and thrive. Start with one plant from this list. Just one. Plant it in the shadiest spot you have. Learn its story. Learn its uses. And then add another. That's how a garden becomes a library. And that's how knowledge that was nearly lost gets passed on again. If this list gave you something to think about, share it with someone who's struggling with a shaded yard, leave a comment with which plant you're starting with, and subscribe if you want more of this kind of deep dive into the plants and practices that shaped how our ancestors lived. The shade in your yard isn't empty, it's waiting.